Welcome everybody. My name is Mindy Clues and I'm based in our Wellington office. And here at Equinox IT I coordinate our learning services. Equinox IT injects fresh thinking to solve tough business problems. We deliver software development, consulting and training services throughout New Zealand. I'm joined today by Bill Ross, Principal Architect at Equinox IT. Today Bill will be presenting our webinar Remaining Relevant in an Agile World. What is an architect to do? Sounds like a challenging question. If you have questions for Bill during the webinar, please enter these in the right-hand side console. We might answer these as we go, otherwise we'll cover them off in the end in the Q&A section. We are recording this webinar and we'll email you later in the week or early next week a copy of the webinar so that you can share it with your friends and your colleagues. We plan to finish today by 12:45. Bill, welcome. I'll hand over to you.
Right, well, thank you, Mindy, and welcome to all of you who have joined us today. In this session, I just wanted to cover off what may be considered the good old days of being a solution or enterprise architect. We'll look at the forces that are driving us to use agile approaches. And in regard to that, we'll look at different contexts that architecting an agile way involves. I'll also sort of touch on what I call the false agile, where people are maybe paying it agile lip service, but are not actually doing it properly. And then finally, sort of wrap up with what, with a good adoption and correct adoption of agile approaches, we can look forward to what I've called the great new days. Okay, so first of all, just this concept of what may have been considered the good old days in the architecture space. We're in environments, used to be in environments that are relatively stable, predictable, maybe even regulated or controlled in certain ways, and a relatively slow cycle of technology disruption. We had the ability, we had timeframes that were in the terms of maybe looking 3 to 5 years ahead, and the role of the architect really was almost an authority role, where you would have long cycles of review and approval, and you would essentially have stage gates, and it would take quite a very tried approach. And you had the role of being an approver, a reviewer, making decisions and having maybe time, all the information at hand, or having the time to wait until the information was available to make decisions. And the architect was really in the role of a controller. Sorts of processes that are in place here used to be things like, well, TOGAF, the architecture development methodology, waterfall phases, and even maybe more heavy rate iterative approaches like the rational unified process. The new reality, what we have now is forces coming at us from what I call above or from outside. This is a situation where organisational senior management, the CXOs of the organisation, recognise a need to make the organisation agile, and this is really an extension of agile concepts from what used to be really confined to software development teams being picked up and applied at organisational levels. There's a lot of work happening in this space. There is work by Denning, who talks about radical management, or the new radical management. And that's really a response to forces that a lot of us are aware of: globalization, deregulation, a faster rate of technology disruption, mobile, cloud, Internet of Things, etc. And even restructuring in organisations, and many disruptive business models where we're getting businesses can be at risk from totally new players using an innovative approach. Also, the business may want to be agile enough to seize windows of opportunity that exist, because often these windows of opportunity aren't open for very long, so they need systems that allow them to seize those opportunities. The other side of it, on the right-hand side, is these what I call forces from below, where you can have very capable development teams who even sometimes under the radar are adopting and applying Agile or Scrum techniques. They normally the fact that they are looking at these different techniques and applying them, things like test-driven development, continuous integration, and short development cycles would indicate that they are more interested in the process of software development and keen to go further. Now, these things may be happening, if you like, under the radar of senior management, and this is what I'd call forces from below. And you can be, as a solution or even enterprise architect, you can be sometimes in the situation where you have very keen development teams wanting to apply these new approaches, but the senior management may not even be aware of them, or the alternate where they have a strategy or a direction of being agile, but the teams aren't used to working in that method, in that approach. Which sort of brings us on to what I've done here in this next slide is look at those sort of two sets of forces. The vertical axis is really showing the degree of drive from an organisation perspective. The organisation wants or needs to be more agile. And the horizontal axis is looking at the degree at which there's a drive from the grassroots teams to be more agile. And these are really contexts. The top right corner, you could maybe consider the ideal situation where you have both top down and bottom up. So, as I was describing, so the top left is the board or senior management have identified agility as strategically important. Bottom right, there's a grassroots drive, and top right, maybe the ideal situation, although it could mean a lot of change happening very quickly. There's also bottom left, where the situation where essentially there may be the status quo. There is no desire or drive, either organisationally or within development teams for agile, or it could be that there's just no recognition of the need to be agile, which could be a concern. Large organisations can have different areas or different business units or departments may have a different mixture of areas, different teams, different departments in different areas of this quadrant.
So we'd like to hear from you. We've got a poll coming up shortly, and we'd like to hear from you what context you're working in. You'll see there are 5 options on that slide for you to select from, and I'm going to launch the GoToWebinar poll now. You'll be able to make your selection, and we'll publish those results as they come through. But I can see that by far the majority are saying that in different contexts, in different parts of the organisation. Is that similar to what you're seeing when you're out in the market practicing?
Yes, I think that would be especially in large organisations where you may have individual teams or departments that are adapting agile. There's certain people who are maybe agile evangelists and really picking up the and encouraging it use in their teams, and it may be individual managers in charge of departments who are trying to drive agility in their department. So that's not at all unusual, I think, especially in the large organisations where you have possibly a number of departments or areas that have different people, obviously, and therefore maybe different emphasis and personalities driving agile.
So I'm going to close that poll and I'll share those results with you. What I think is interesting about that, Bill, is that no one on the webinar is saying there's a top-down drive for agility.
Now that is interesting, actually, because there's a lot of talk now. I mean, I was thinking the other few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, even the Australian Prime Minister, I forget which one it was, they change so often, actually talked about there being an agile Australia. And there's a lot of talk, and actually some organisations offer even certification. For example, I think IC Agile is one, for the whole organisation, and it's almost a totally different area to just agility in areas of software development or software operations like DevOps.
I'm going to hide those poll results now and continue on with the webinar presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. Okay, so just compare the different contexts and what it means in terms of applying the Agile values. Now, the Agile values, probably aware of, from the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So for the top-down situation, managers are really, instead of being managers, they are becoming enablers, or sometimes called servant leaders. So an organisation doing top-down agility, you're really moving from a command and control type environment really to dynamic linking of key players. So essentially links are formed between those with the right knowledge, those with the responsibility, etc., to get the job done. And you move from command and control to conversations occurring. In terms of working software, the concept of incremental delivery. So the management should be willing to accept solutions that don't have all the bells and whistles being delivered, and even the concept of some people may have heard of the minimal viable product. Effectively, you put out a solution that meets the minimal need, and then you learn from that, and then adapt that minimal viable product subsequently, which can be quite a different mindset and approach from a governance perspective to waiting until the whole system is built with all its bells and whistles and then deploying it. Customer collaboration with new systems, really, especially systems that are interfacing directly with the organisation's customers. The object is to delight the customers. Again, I mentioned Denning earlier. Denning talks about that being the prime driver, as opposed to necessarily just making profit, in that if you delight the customers, the profit will follow. And the customers have so many more choices, and the customer has a lot more control now of who they buy from, who they interact with, than they were in the past, as you'll probably all be aware with mobile devices, etc. Responding to change. This one here, this idea, some people may again have heard of this, of product pivoting, where they need the agility to, maybe they put a product into the marketplace, but the lessons they learn from that are such that, gee, we got it wrong, we need to pivot or change direction on this product quite quickly to take advantage of maybe a market opportunity or information that wasn't apparent when they first started, which is again this top management concept of saying, okay, we need to change the direction of this product entirely and be able to do it quickly. So they're the sorts of the way agility in an organisational context tends to will manifest itself. Looking at the other side of it, if you like the bottom-up approach, this is pretty much your standard agile development team type things, where instead of a lot of documentation, there will be conversations among all those in the team, including product owners, etc. In terms of working software, they want to build from the earliest iterations of the system. They are building production quality into the system from the start. They don't sort of wait till the testing maybe at the end of the project drive out quality issues. That should be built in from the beginning. Customer collaboration, this whole concept of a product owner role who is embedded in the team and available to the team to give direction and to prioritise what work has to be done. And in terms of responding to change, the fact you have sprints, which are 1 to 4 weeks normally, and you can reprioritise in the sprint planning phase. That gives you that ability, to respond to change quite quickly. So those last two, this slide and the previous one, we're really talking about the way that the different ways that agility manifests itself from an organisational perspective, and also from down in the, say, development or delivery team's perspective. This next slide essentially summarises those points. With down the left-hand side, we have the Agile Values, and then we look at the manifestation of those from an organisational change perspective and from a development team perspective from the right-hand column.
We'll just give you 15 or 20 seconds to read that slide before we move on.
Okay. Now, just considering the architect's role in these different contexts, as an architect, you're sort of in a leadership position. It could be considered a middle management position in that you're trying to, direct or influence development teams and other technical people to be aligned with what the business outcomes and concerns are. So in a situation where we've got a management drive for agility in an organisation, I think the first step is make sure that they really understand what agility is all about. Unfortunately, it can be a lot of lip service can be made to being agile. It's a cool term, but really there is quite a bit of literature and thinking around what agility really means, and does management actually understand that and buy into the values and the ideas. So that's, I think, the first step. Assuming they've got their head around it, we obviously would be involved into supporting management introducing Agile into the organisation, and that would involve the step of looking at changing existing processes, because you may have certain stage gates and processes that just are opposite, that do not support Agile approaches. So you're going to have to change those or support management in changing those to be aligned with an Agile approach. There also are frameworks that exist in terms of adopting an Agile approach in an organisation. There's a large-scale Scrum or less. There's also the Scaled Agile Framework or SAFe, sort of potentially frameworks that could be used, but I think they would have to be adopted in a very managed way and with associated training and everything else. Bottom up, again, this as per for management. Development teams may say they're doing Agile, but you really need to just ensure they are doing it properly. Often the ceremonies of Agile can be followed, but has the culture really changed? So I think you just sort of validate that they are actually doing it the way it should be done. Agile development actually requires a lot of discipline, although it may not, because of there's often less documentation, but the discipline has to exist. So then looking at maybe using evidence, from internal projects that may have been done in an Agile manner, or possibly external ones that you can reference to introduce or sell Agile approaches to management. This really is, they've got to see the advantages to the approach, and it may mean investment in training, etc., to make the adoption. So it's really using the drive and the enthusiasm maybe from grassroots teams and having the management see the advantages of those approaches. A possible way of growing it is to run what I call a safe to fail Agile trial. Safe to fail, I mean the project itself may not be mission critical, and the primary outcome of such a trial is to learn and to identify lessons, and if you're going to do it next time, how you would do it better. The Agile adoption isn't straightforward. It is quite a culture change, and it requires changes in people's attitudes and behaviours. Okay, this slide, just looking at, this is a model I've used in the past, where when you look at, as the architect, an architect role, what you need to know, what you need to do, and who you need to be, and just considering it in context of that top left quadrant. In terms of knowledge, you've got to understand the business drivers for agility. Why is the business wanting to be agile, and do they understand what it means? Also talk about Agile's theoretical underpinnings. In the early days of Agile, I must admit I was probably a bit of a skeptic, but as it evolved and more was written and there was more literature which brought forward some of the actual the underpinnings of Agile from a theoretical perspective, including things like empirical process control, limiting work in progress, the Kanban approaches, and things that actually came from lean manufacturing, and the ideas from that were actually what were the underpinnings of Agile approaches. So I think you need to understand those. The various Agile management approaches I mentioned, large-scale Scrum and SAFe previously. There's also a thing called Nexus, which is another way of scaling Scrum, and knowing key techniques like Kanban, etc. In terms of what you do, well, I think I mentioned trialing Agile, and decision-making is quite different in Agile. It might not be that you, as an architect, because you're an architect, you're the one that makes the decisions. You may be more the facilitator of the decision-making, making sure the right person with the appropriate knowledge makes the right decision at the right time. I think in my previous webinar I spoke about delaying decisions. Not all decisions have to be decisions that can be put off till later, sometimes referred to as the last responsible moment, can make more sense than trying to make decisions when you lack information or knowledge. And in terms of who you need to be, really you need to be obviously honest, a realist, particularly tolerant of uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and that can be quite difficult at times. You need to sort of move through the fog of information, but be able to still keep moving forward. Obviously flexible, pragmatic, etc. I mentioned you need to be skeptical but not cynical. And in this role also you would want to be looking at being a teacher and a mentor to others to introduce Agile. Okay, the next slide similarly looks at what you need to know, do and be for the bottom-up situation, or the bottom-up context. Again, theoretical understanding and the core techniques. What we need to do is ensure it is being actually applied as it should be. You need to radiate information, so information that is, maybe great, good news stories coming out of Agile teams, making sure that they are known in the organisation, and building a trust relationship. Sometimes development teams can be a bit worried about architects coming in and essentially slowing them down and making their work harder as opposed to easier. So you've got to work through that and form those trust relationships with the teams. And in terms of what you need to be, the things that I think probably good architects should be anyway is, innovative, investigative, practical, etc. And also being, no one knows it all, so you need to be open to letting people know what you don't know, but having ways of finding out. Okay, then this one, if you're in the bottom left, there's really no changes. So do what you currently do and be who you currently are. However, you may want to sort of consider, why I'm in that situation. Is there any awareness of Agile approaches in my organisation? If not, I'd sort of wonder why not. Why does my organisation not need to be Agile? Maybe you've got a protected monopoly, which isn't threatened. I don't know, it depends on the organisation, but they're quite rare these days. Do we have more Agile competitors who are sort of going to eat our lunch if we don't become Agile? And then really, should I become the Agile champion in the organisation and try to show how Agile approaches could be of benefit within the organisation?
We'd like to hear a little bit more from you. Bill's spoken a little about how he came to Agile, or to grow his Agile awareness. We'd like to know from you what your top priority is for evolving your own Agile capability. So I've launched another poll for you there. There is an option for you to comment, and we'd like you to do that, sharing what your priorities are using the right-hand side console. Bill, for most of the people who voted so far, skills, tools and techniques are top of the list in terms of evolving their own Agile capability. What would you say about the key tools and techniques that you've adopted and applied?
Right. I think I had done Agile course, a 2-day course, which I found really, really good, which was a Scrum Master course, mainly because it did go into some of the theoretical underpinnings of it, and also had some quite practical exercises in the course, which was good. Interestingly, Scrum has really only 3 defined roles: the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the development team, which is sort of everybody else. And when you're sort of in roles that have names like project manager and business analyst and architect, you sort of think, well, how do I fit into that? And that's probably a key cultural change, is that you're not necessarily a person with a specific job title and role. You are now part of a multidisciplinary team. So, and then associated with that are the various given that context, I've got to work well with this team, and we use the key, Scrum techniques. There's sprint planning, there's ways of doing estimation, the product backlog. There's various things around it that directly support what they call an empirical process control method with quick cycles of feedback. So getting your head around that and how those tools and techniques work, but also what their theoretical underpinnings are. I found that key. And once I sort of had that, then there's things like further reading. There's many books. Lean software development I find particularly good from the Poop Index, because they draw a lot from Toyota's lean manufacturing and things like that. And at a more organisational level, Denning has, Radical Management is the title of his book, and that's looking at taking Agile right out of the software development context and looking at it from a total organisation perspective. So I guess that would be follow-up reading, which was really, really quite informative.
I'm going to close that poll now and share those results with you all. Bill, we've got a comment and a question from Tim. Tim saying this isn't really covering the role of an architect. It all assumes that an architect runs the agile part of a project. How about the ideas of whether the upfront architecture and design is appropriate? So what's your response to that?
Yeah, this is a sort of pushback you get from agile teams about no big design up front, which is a bit extreme, to be honest. I guess I'd go back to the idea of architectural decisions. You can make the decisions that are safe to make with the information you had, but you may have to accept that there's some decisions you're not in a position to make. Therefore, by using quick cycles and learning from what is actually developed and deployed, you can then make decisions with better information subsequently. So it's that concept of just-in-time architectural decision-making. So it's still the role, and this is this concept of, you do have this job title architect, or are you just a member of the team who has architecture skills? So, and are you also better helping mentor and coach others in the team so that they can make better architectural decisions themselves? So it's more, I guess, the cultural aspect of the change to Agile.
Thanks, Phil. I'm going to hide those poll results now and we'll return to the presentation. Okay, so just want to say this one slide, just what I call the False Agile. This may be, you've got management, and what they've done is they've latched onto this cool word Agile, which they put in their mission statement. And so therefore I've got Agile in the mission statement, therefore make sure this app goes to market as soon as possible, and it better have all the non-functionals I expect, and just do it. And then I guess the other, at the bottom, if you like, or the other extreme, you've got the development team who are, again, paying lip service to Agile. All cool, man, we're doing Agile. We don't have to do any documentation, etc., etc. The architecture will just emerge, leave it to us. And in this situation, the architect is sort of potentially stuck in the middle of a very poor situation where they don't really, they haven't got it culturally, or they're not doing it properly, either from the top or the bottom. So just be aware of those situations to be avoided. If it's done properly, this is the ideal sort of situation you'll be in. We'll be in an environment which is dynamic, it can be unpredictable. That's sort of the reality of current business environments. Deregulated, fast technology disruption cycles. And your role is now more of a coach, facilitator, team member, a servant leader, and a doer. So it is, I guess, different to the good old days I described earlier. It's the nature of Agile culture change is it's less hierarchical. It's more a meritocracy than a bureaucracy, and that's effectively when it's done well and is implemented and is effectively adopted in an organisation, can give the organisation significant advantages. So just in summary, I feel that if you're not doing Agile now, you soon probably will need to be. And the drive can be internal, external, or potentially both. Beware of the false Agile, as I mentioned. And
if the environment gets it right, it can be a great place to work. And generally, as in most situations, really, who you are and what you do is normally more important than what you know. And just like you keep that in mind in terms of your growth in a solution architecture career.
Thanks, Bill. We've come to the end of the formal part of today's webinar. If you'd like to know more about how Equinox IT could help you make the most of your IT, or to talk more with Bill about his thoughts around Agile architecture, please get in touch. We will have some questions and answers shortly, so if you have those, please post those in the right-hand side console. Equinox IT regularly hosts our webinars, and we also are regularly publishing content on our blog. So if you want to stay in touch with us and find out more about what we're doing and what we're thinking, please go online and subscribe to our blog. We're going to have a couple of questions now. So, Bill, I've got a question from Peter. Peter's asking how to best advocate for Agile if he finds himself in the bottom left quadrant.
Good question. I guess if you validate the need, that does the organisation need agility, and I think it would be an unusual situation to say they don't. And what are the threats to the organisation of not being agile? Be it new players in the market or missing opportunities that an agile approach could provide. And I guess, as per the slide, is that what you need to do, I guess, is find out about it. Maybe colleagues in other organisations that are applying or adapting or adopting Agile, and what the advantages are potentially finding from it. It's one of those things where it's gathering. The adoption of Agile is increasing significantly, but doing it well is quite hard. It's one of those things where it's easy to understand, but it can be quite hard to do well. So yeah, it's I think you need to first of all make sure you personally understand it, got your head around it, then talk to other practitioners from outside your organisation, and start just introducing the idea. Because you may just find within maybe the management team someone who recognises the need for agility, and maybe form almost a team or a relationship with them to see how you could best advantage your organisation through adopting the approach. You could be careful not to oversell it. It's not an easy journey. It's not a panacea that we'll go agile and our problems are solved. That's got to be very careful in terms of not overselling it. But there may be also particular issues or pain points the organisation is currently suffering, and or projects that are occurring on projects, and can the Agile approach address those pain points?
Got a question from Peter. How does the architect's role in Agile drive their engagement with the development team? So in terms of the stand-ups or the ceremonies and artifacts of Scrum.
Right. I touched on this a little bit in the last webinar I did, and I think ideally you would be in the development team, in the Scrum team, which would potentially mean attending the stand-ups and being available to the team, being involved in the sprint planning, and because I think what will be items, if you like, that need to be created on the board, maybe architectural decisions. And I talked in the last webinar about the architect's prime deliverable being delivering architectural decisions, not all at once, but as needed to give the development team enough architectural runway, to keep moving forward. So the closer the better. Some architects find themselves, involved in several projects simultaneously, which could obviously make them very busy. But I think ideally they would at least be attending the sprint planning sessions, and they should, as Scrum allows, they can add items to the product backlog in terms of maybe they're the non-functional things that architects are often concerned with, security, performance, etc., etc. So they can and should have the ability to add those sorts of items to the product backlog, make sure they're addressed, and also talk to and form a relationship with the product owner to ensure that those non-functional type requirements are given the priorities that they deserve. Point out the risks as well. If we don't meet the security non-functional requirements, there'll be real issues, etc. So as close as possible. If you can't get that close to it, then it's a bit harder. You become just probably an external party to the project who is primarily just trying to influence the product owners and others in the project, to do good work, as it were. That's probably not the ideal situation.
No, closely related question from Richard. Does the architect need to be in every sprint to get visibility of design impacting decisions, as the team may be aware of those impacts?
In every sprint, sprint planning. I mean, they've got the daily stand-up cycle, which may be difficult if he's involved in many projects for an architect to be at every stand-up if he's involved in multiple projects. But in terms of the sprint planning, I think definitely. But early on, most definitely, because that's when some key architectural decisions will be made. This concept, I think, of architectural runway. And even they talk about some methodologies, sprint zero, where you build essentially the walking skeleton, where the initial technical architectural decisions are made. But there's no guarantee that some of those decisions may not have to be revisited because they are based potentially on assumptions of how components will work, the expectations of performance, which could be found to be not true once they start, when they get further into development, and therefore they've got to look at alternatives. I think the hard part is thinking that you can set an architecture in stone and detailed design in stone early on, and then expect it not to have to be changed or altered subsequently, which goes back to this whole underlying principle of agile development, which is empirical process control, i.e. basing the decisions and what you do on the reality of what you're discovering and finding out as you develop the actual system itself.
So on a follow-up question from Tim, it sounds like you're not saying that the role of an agile architect on a project is simply has been reduced to that of an agile coach. There's more to it than that.
No, certainly not reduced to it. I just would say that it includes coaching. So you could say that it's expanded from just maybe making the decisions and saying do it this way to actually growing the capability of the whole team, so that you can coach and develop people so that you're almost satisfied that they can make decisions that maybe previously you had to make, which is good for you in that it frees you up to do other things, and it's good for the organisation in that the general architecture capability has grown. It's just changing the concept from being a policeman or an enforcer or a decider to a knowledgeable go-to person in the team who people trust to make good decisions. So that goes right back to the whole concept of the cultural change with Agile.
We've got one question here from Anupama. How can we make choices on tool set without knowing the requirements?
Well, not knowing the requirements. I'm not saying that. Why don't we know the requirements? So the Agile approaches involve this concept of user stories, and they capture, even initially, the requirements early on. So the toolset question is often more potentially a constraint from the organisation. They may just have a strategy of a certain technology set. There may be a Microsoft shop or a Java shop or whatever they happen to be. So often they're taken as a given. In terms of other sorts of tools, there are certain tools that you'd expect almost any agile team that's got their act together to have. I mean, I'm thinking of unit testing, continuous integration, continuous delivery, maybe code metrics, going over the code base regularly to reporting issues. So I'm actually not sure about not knowing the requirements. There should be a product backlog that before you can start the first sprint, the high priority items on that product backlog are gone through during a sprint planning session in quite a bit of detail to sort out, understand the requirements, to understand if there's any ambiguity around them, etc., etc. And then once they're happy with it, the team are happy to estimate on it, and then they go into the development cycle for those sets of requirements.
Thanks, Bill. That's pretty much all we've got time for today.